He was a quiet mechanic who preferred the company of trees and silence over people and noise. She was a stranger who stumbled into his life by the light of a flickering campfire, cold, lost, and running from something she wouldn't name. That night in the mountains, something unexpected began. Not with grand declarations, but with shared coffee, shared silence, and a spark neither of them saw coming. If you believe that some of the most powerful stories start in the simplest moments, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next journey of love, healing, and second chances. Now let's begin this unforgettable story. A mechanic shared his campfire with a lost hiker. She was the CEO who'd been disappearing for days. The wind whispered low over the pines, sending soft sighs through the branches high above. In the clearing just off a quiet mountain trail, a small orange flame danced in a circle of riverstones. Beside it sat a man alone, broad-shouldered hands rough from years of honest labor, face creased by more sorrow than age. His name was Eli Turner, and tonight marked the 9th year he had come to this place, lit this same fire, and sat in silence with ghosts only he could see. The campfire crackled gently, throwing flickering light across Eli's weathered features. He stirred a battered kettle over the flame, the scent of strong black coffee rising into the crisp dusk air. The forest around him was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of squirrels bedding down, or a lone owl calling somewhere in the canopy. Solitude didn't bother Eli. It was familiar. It had become his way of life since everything he loved had been taken from him. He leaned back against a fallen log, his gaze lifted toward the stars just beginning to prick the darkening sky. The wind shifted slightly and he pulled his flannel jacket tighter around him. Memories crept in like fog. Emily's laughter, Caleb's tiny fingers clutching his hand, a birthday cake that never got eaten, a phone call he wished he could unhear. Eli didn't believe in signs anymore. The universe didn't owe him anything. But there was something about this stretch of wilderness that called to him every October, like an unspoken truce between him and grief. He never brought company, never told anyone where he went. People in town respected that he was the quiet kind, dependable, good with engines and silence. Folks left him to it. He was just lifting the kettle to pour himself a tin cup of coffee when he heard a snap of a twig, sudden and sharp like an uninvited thought breaking into a moment of peace. Eli's hand froze midair. Another rustle. This one closer. He reached slowly toward his flashlight, heart ticking a notch faster. Bears weren't uncommon this time of year, and though Eli wasn't the panicking type, he had enough respect for nature to stay wary. He clicked the light on and pointed it toward the tree line. That's when he saw her. She stumbled into view like something out of a dream or maybe a nightmare. Mud clung to her legs, her clothes torn at the sleeves and damp with sweat and dirt. Blonde hair matted to her face. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, and her eyes wild, panicked, desperate. "Hey," Eli stood, slowly hands up to show he meant no harm. "You okay?" She didn't answer, just staggered another step forward and dropped to her knees near the fire. Eli rushed forward to catch her before she collapsed entirely. Her body was trembling, skin ice cold despite the sweat. Up close, he could see the cuts on her palms, a bruise blooming along her cheek. He crouched beside her. "You're hurt. How long have you been out here?" She blinked slowly, trying to focus. Her lips parted. "Days," she whispered. "I think 3. Maybe more." Okay, let's get you warm first." He eased her closer to the fire, draping his extra flannel jacket over her shoulders. "Name's Eli. Can you tell me yours?" She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of an answer. Then Evie. It was a lie, but Eli didn't press. He saw the fear behind her eyes, the guarded wall of someone used to not trusting anyone. He didn't need her life story, not tonight. He poured her a cup of coffee, offered a protein bar from his pack, and sat beside her without asking questions. The fire crackled between them, soft and steady. "I was hiking," she said finally, staring into the flames. "Took a wrong turn, got separated from my guide. My phone died. Then the storm hit," Eli nodded. "Weather's been rough the past few days. You're lucky you made it down this far. Not many folks come this deep into the range." She gave a bitter half smile. "I wasn't trying to be found." That caught his attention, but again he said nothing, just took a sip from his cup, letting the quiet fill the space. Evie glanced sideways at him. You always camp out here alone every year? Why? He hesitated, then answered truthfully. Anniversary wedding. He shook his head. Loss. A long silence passed between them, but this one wasn't uncomfortable. There was something grounding about Eli, the way he didn't flinch at pain, didn't demand explanations, didn't fill the air with empty words. I used to be somebody, she said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. You still are, he replied. Evie looked at him sharply as if trying to figure out whether he was mocking her, but his face was calm, sincere. She stared at the fire again, the glow softening the lines of exhaustion on her face. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not asking, who Eli nodded. You'll tell me if you want to or not, doesn't change the fact that you're here now, and alive. That last word hung heavy between them. Alive. Sometimes that was all someone could be, and all they needed to be for a while. Above them, the stars multiplied, the fire burned steady, and in the hush of the mountain night, a man and a woman, both broken in ways neither could yet understand, shared warmth without asking why. It was the beginning neither of them had seen coming, and neither would ever forget. The fire crackled low as night pressed deeper into the valley. Eli kept an eye on the woman wrapped in his flannel jacket, now curled on a foam pad near the edge of the firelight. Her body had stopped shaking, but the lines on her face told him she hadn't truly relaxed. Not yet. He moved with quiet efficiency, adding a log to the fire, adjusting the angle of the tarp he'd set up overhead in case of more rain. It wasn't much, but it would keep them dry. The forecast had warned of another cold snap tonight, and the last thing she needed was another chill. He glanced over again. She hadn't moved, Evie, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. You still awake? A pause, then a quiet. Yeah, I've got some soup on the stove if you can stomach it. She nodded without meeting his eyes. Eli poured the steaming contents of a small pot into a tin cup and brought it to her. Chicken noodle canned, nothing special but warm. He crouched beside her as she took it with trembling hands. She sipped slowly, like someone relearning the act of eating. After a moment she said, You always this prepared? I used to go off-grid for weeks at a time. Eli replied, settling onto a folded blanket nearby. Back when I needed to get away from everything. And now he shrugged. Now I just come out a few days a year. This place, he gestured at the surrounding pines, the stillness. It's where I can hear myself think. Where I remember them, Evie didn't ask who them was. She didn't need to. Grief had a tone, a gravity all its own. She recognized it in his voice, the way people who have known real loss. Can I get that? She whispered, voice hoarse. Noise is the easiest place to hide. Silence, and that's where the truth is. Eli studied her in the flickering light. You running from something. She looked up at him for the first time since the fire had been lit. Her eyes were striking, not because of their color, but because of the weight they carried. Something about her felt older than her years, like she'd seen too much of the world and had stopped trusting any part of it. Not running, she said quietly. Escaping. He nodded. Letting that sit. Well, you made it to the right place for that. There's no cell service out here, and town's a 2-hour hike more if the trail's muddy. Nobody's looking for you tonight. Her hands tightened around the cup. You're not worried about who I might be. No, Eli said simply, you're someone who needed help. That's all I need to know. The silence returned, but this time it felt less like an absence and more like a shelter. The fire popped as the logs shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Evie closed her eyes and breathed in the wood smoke. The mountain air, the quiet that wasn't empty, but sacred. This wasn't like any night she'd known. She had spent so many years in penthouses, boardrooms, surrounded by people paid to agree with her, to obey her. There was something painfully liberating about being just Evie to this man who didn't care what title she once carried. I wasn't supposed to disappear, she said suddenly. Eli turned toward her, but didn't speak. I was supposed to be in Aspen Conference Media new round of investor talks. Instead, I went hiking, told my assistant I needed a day. Just one day to breathe. She rubbed at her face with the back of her sleeve. My guide fell and broke his ankle. I panicked. Took off trying to find help, got lost in the storm. Everything after that is bits and pieces. He nodded slowly. Lucky I had the fire going. She gave a short laugh, dry but real. Lucky doesn't quite cover it. You don't strike me as the reckless type I used to be. She paused until recklessness became too expensive. That caught Eli's attention. There was a bitterness in her tone that went deeper than this single misstep. You run a company or something? He asked, carefully casual. Her gaze flicked to him, and for a brief second he saw the CEO mask return, composed, controlled. Then as quickly as it appeared, it fell away. Yeah, I did. You quit, I disappeared. Eli didn't push further. Instead, he stood and walked over to a small cooler, pulling out a bottle of water and offering it to her. She took it with a quiet thank you. He returned to his place beside the fire. Well, Evie, he said, voice even, you're safe here tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out what's next. Evie looked at him. You're really just okay with this? He met her gaze without flinching. Look, I've been where the world felt too loud, where getting lost seemed easier than being found. I don't know what drove you out here, and I won't pretend to fix anything, but I can keep you warm, fed, and safe until morning. That's enough for now. For the first time, her eyes welled, not from exhaustion or cold, but from something else. The aching shock of being seen without being judged. She whispered, thank you. Eli didn't say you're welcome. He simply gave a nod, turned back to the fire, and let the flames speak for both of them. As the stars multiplied above and the night deepened, Evie leaned back against the blanket and stared at the sky. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of waking up. And across the fire, Eli watched her with quiet curiosity. He had no idea that the woman sleeping a few feet away was Evelyn Reed, the tech magnate whose disappearance was flashing across national headlines. All he knew was that she looked like someone who hadn't rested in years, and for tonight, that was enough. The morning broke with pale gold streaks stretching over the mountain ridge, casting a cool light over the clearing. Eli was already up, crouched beside the fire pit, stirring the embers back to life. A kettle hissed quietly as it heated, and the scent of pine and smoke lingered in the crisp dawn air. He glanced over his shoulder. Evie was still asleep, wrapped in the thick flannel and his spare blanket. Her face, half turned into the pillow, looked softer now, less guarded, almost peaceful. The bruise along her cheek had darkened, but seemed less angry in the morning light. Even in rest, her body carried tension, as though she never fully let her guard down. Eli poured hot water over coffee grounds, waiting as the aroma bloomed. He didn't make a sound, not wanting to wake her. Not yet. People who carried storms in their chests needed to ease into morning. About 10 minutes later, she stirred, a slight shift of the blanket, a hand pushing her tangled hair from her face. Coffee, he offered, holding out a steaming tin cup. She blinked, squinting at him through the filtered light. You make this place feel like a hotel. Eli gave a quiet laugh. Well, you're the only guest service is decent. Views aren't bad either. She took the cup, and as her hands wrapped around it, her fingers brushed his brief accidental, but enough to feel the contrast. Her skin was soft but scraped, bruised by days lost in the wild. His hands, though calloused and steady, flinched slightly at the contact. Neither of them mentioned it. They sat in silence for a few minutes, sipping coffee, watching steam rise in curls toward the pine canopy. Evie spoke first. I had a house in Napa once, spent a fortune designing it like a rustic retreat, fireplace, cedar beams, the whole catalog dream. It never smelled like this. She paused, not real like this. Eli raised an eyebrow. Sounds nice. It was beautiful, but empty, like one of those designer cabins people pose in for Instagram. Nobody actually lived in it. I barely stayed there myself. You've lived in a lot of places. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Lived no, stayed yes. There's a difference. Eli nodded, understanding more than he said. There is. She leaned forward a bit, warming her hands. You from around here. Mountain pine born and raised. I left for a few years after high school. Thought I'd chase something. Ended up working rigs in Texas. Met my wife there. Evie's head tilted, slightly listening. She hated the heat. Eli continued, a half smile ghosting across his face. Convinced me to move back to Colorado. Said the mountains felt like real earth. We bought a small house. I opened a little garage. Thought we had time. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. Evie looked down into her cup, her voice low. I'm sorry, it was an accident. Winter storm, black ice, wrong place, wrong time. He said it plainly, but the rawness beneath was palpable. They were driving back from visiting her sister. I was home fixing the kitchen sink. She didn't ask how long it had been. That kind of grief never became past tense. I disappeared for a while after that. Eli said shut down the shop. Lived up here for months. Couldn't stand the sound of life going on without them, and now I come up here once a year. Same weekend, light the fire. Remember, he turned to her, not to be sad, well, not only to be sad, to remind myself I still survived. Evie didn't speak right away. Her throat tightened around something unsaid. That's brave. No, Eli said gently. It's necessary. The forest stirred around them. Birds called overhead, and a breeze swept through the camp. Eli began packing up a few supplies, checking the weather radio. He glanced up at the sky. Clouds are moving in again. Not good hiking weather. You should rest up today. She hesitated. I don't want to be a burden. You're not really. He looked at her squarely. Evie, I've spent most of the last decade keeping to myself, fixing machines. But when someone stumbles out of the woods looking like you did last night, the only right thing is to help. You don't owe me anything. Her lips parted, slightly surprised by the clarity of his kindness. People usually want something. I'm not people. A smile tugged at her mouth, small, uncertain, but real. They passed the morning slowly. Eli cooked a modest breakfast, instant oats and a few dried apple slices. Evie ate with the hunger of someone too long without comfort. By late morning, she ventured a few feet from camp to sit on a rock that overlooked a shallow ravine. Eli watched from a distance, letting her have space. When she returned, she looked calmer, though something lingered in her eyes. Eli. She said, stepping close last night. I lied. He didn't look surprised about your name. Yes, he nodded. Figured you're not going to ask the real one? Nope. Her brow furrowed. Why not? Because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready or not. Doesn't change how cold it is at night. She stared at him, shaken by the simplicity of it. After a pause, she said, Evelyn Reed. He blinked. Recognition flickered across his face. The name had been on every TV in every gas station across the country for days. CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm, missing since last Friday. Search teams deployed media frenzy. But Eli just nodded once. Thanks for telling me, he said, as if she'd simply told him her middle name. You're not going to treat me differently. Nope, still just someone who nearly froze to death near my campfire. Her eyes stung. You have no idea what that means to me. Eli met her gaze steady. I think maybe I do. The fire popped again between them, and somewhere in the stillness of that high mountain forest, something fragile began to form. Trust, perhaps, or hope, or maybe just the kind of quiet understanding that two damaged people could share without needing to explain it. For the first time in years, Evelyn Reed felt something like peace. And Eli, for the first time in a long while, didn't mind the company. The wind shifted in the late afternoon, carrying with it the kind of bite that meant trouble was brewing higher in the peaks. Eli stood just beyond the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning the tree line as a curtain of steel-gray clouds rolled in over the western ridge. He sniffed the air the way mountain men do, silent, instinctive. The old kind of knowing passed down not through books, but through weathered experience. We're not hiking out tomorrow, he said more to himself than to the woman behind him. Evelyn sat cross-legged near the fire pit, peeling an orange he'd handed her earlier. She looked up, shielding her eyes. Is that your mountain man way of saying, we're snowed in storms moving fast? That trail's going to disappear under 4 inches of snow by morning. She looked at the sky as if daring it to prove him wrong. Then she sighed, holding out a segment of the orange like a peace offering. Looks like fate wants us to stay strangers a little longer. Eli took the slice with a slight smile, sat down across from her, and tossed another log on the fire. You seem a little less afraid of the quiet today. I'm not, she said. I'm just more afraid of what's waiting on the other side of it. He studied her in silence. You know what's strange, she said. I've been in boardrooms with the world's most powerful people, sat across from senators, billionaires. I've spoken on stages in front of thousands. But I don't think I've ever felt as exposed as I do here, sitting in the dirt with you. Eli poked the fire, letting the embers flare orange and red. That's not strange. The woods don't care about your resume. They just want to know if you'll survive the night. She let out a breath, part laughter, part weariness. Well, I'm still learning. The snow started just after sunset. First it was gentle, like sifted flour caught in the wind, but by nightfall it thickened into something more determined. Eli reinforced the tarp, tucking it tighter over the lean-to, anchoring the corners with stones. He set up another thermal blanket across the back to trap warmth. I don't remember the last time I slept outside during snow. Evelyn murmured, watching him work. It's not so bad if you've got fire and dry socks and a mechanic who thinks of everything. He glanced up at her. I've had years to get it right. As darkness blanketed the forest, the snow fell in thick sheets. The fire crackled high now, a defense against the cold, and the creeping edges of vulnerability that neither of them dared to name. Eli passed her another tin cup of warm broth and settled in beside the fire. Evelyn hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever get tired of being alone?" He didn't answer right away. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face. Sometimes, he admitted, it's quieter without the weight of expectations. But yeah, sometimes it's too quiet. Same, she said. I used to think noise was power, activity, movement, deals headlines, but it got so loud I couldn't hear myself anymore. That's what scared me most. Eli looked over, his voice low. So you disappeared? She nodded. My board didn't know. My assistant panicked. They probably think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. He gave her a long, level gaze. You didn't lose your mind. You just reached the edge of it, and instead of falling off, you stepped back. She swallowed hard. The words hit deeper than she expected. That's a kind way to put it. Truth doesn't have to be cruel to be honest. For a while, neither of them spoke. The snow whispered against the tarp. The fire popped. The world had shrunk to a tiny circle of light and warmth, and within it sat two people who had run from different kinds of grief. One from the past, one from the present, meeting here in the stillness. You miss them every day, don't you? She asked. He nodded once. Does it get easier? No, he said softly, but it gets quieter. And in that quiet, sometimes something else grows, not instead of the pain alongside it. She nodded, absorbing the weight of that truth. I used to think being alone was a weakness, she said. Now I think it might be the only thing that ever told me the truth. Eli smiled faintly. The mountains are good at that. They shared another silence, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. A silence between two people no longer strangers, but not quite something else either. When the fire had burned low and the snow fell steadily around them, Evelyn wrapped the blanket tighter and shifted closer to the warmth. If I hadn't found this fire, if I hadn't found you, I don't think I would have made it. He didn't answer immediately. Then sometimes a fire's just in the right place at the right time. But what if it wasn't chance? He turned to her, thoughtful. Then maybe it was grace. She watched him for a long moment, the firelight flickering in her eyes, and in that moment something opened. In her, not fully, not yet, but a door cracked just wide enough for hope to peer through. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside the firelight, two souls stayed warm, not just from the flames, but from something far rarer. Something neither had come looking for. Something neither was quite ready to name, but something both would remember forever. The world looked different in the morning. Clean, quiet, wrapped in a blanket of fresh white that muted every sound, softened every edge. Snow clung to the pine branches like sugar, and the trail they had followed in was now erased, replaced by undisturbed white drifts that glittered under the pale sun. Eli stood with his hands on his hips, surveying the tree line. He hadn't spoken much since waking, not out of discomfort, but because something in the air told him this was the last morning. Evelyn emerged from the lean-to a few minutes later, wrapped in his spare jacket, boots caked with snow. Her breath formed small clouds in the crisp air, and her hair, still tangled, still wild, hung over her shoulders like an unspoken story. She moved to stand beside him, silent at first. Then, it's beautiful, It always is after a storm. Eli said. She glanced at him, her voice quiet. I don't think I want to go back. He didn't look at her. Then don't. It's not that simple. It never is. They stood there together looking at nothing in particular and everything at once. The snow, the trees, the clearing that had somehow become a sacred space between their broken lives. Then came the sound, low at first like the rumble of distant thunder, then louder, sharper helicopter blades. Eli's jaw tightened. Evelyn turned, heart leaping into her throat. Already he gave a nod, probably caught the signal from the emergency beacon I tripped last night. Her mouth parted. You called them. You're dehydrated, bruised, disoriented, and the weather's unpredictable. I figured it was time. She looked away. I was just starting to feel like I could breathe again. You still can, Eli said. Breathing doesn't have to stop just because life gets loud again. The black helicopter broke through the clearing like a mechanical bird kicking up a swirl of snow and leaves as it descended. A man in a Navy rescue parka stepped out as the blade spun down, calling Evelyn's name. She didn't respond immediately. The rescue worker jogged toward them. Ms. Reed. Evelyn Reed. Thank God, we've been searching for you for days. Are you all right? Eli stepped back instinctively, letting her answer. Evelyn hesitated, then she turned slowly, nodded once and said, Yes, I'm okay now. Do you need medical assistance? She glanced at Eli. No. He already gave me more than I needed. The man gave Eli a cursory nod, but quickly turned his attention back to the woman he clearly recognized from headlines and photos. We've got a medic on board. We'll get you checked out and flown straight to Denver. Your assistant's been fielding media calls all week. There's a press conference scheduled. No, she said, sharp enough to cut through the buzz of the still spinning blades. No press, no statements. I need time. The man blinked, clearly caught off guard, but nodded. Of course, whatever you say. She turned to Eli again, her lips parted then closed. There was too much to say and no time. I don't even know your last name, she said. Turner. She nodded. Eli Turner. And you're Evelyn Reed. She said, I'm not sure who I am now. He looked at her gently. Maybe that's a good thing. A gust of wind blew between them, pulling at her coat. She didn't step forward. She didn't hug him. Something in her knew it would undo her completely. Instead, she reached into the pocket of the flannel jacket and pulled out the small Swiss Army knife he had given her 2 nights before. She held it out. I borrowed this. He shook his head. Keep it for the next trail. She swallowed hard. I meant what I said. You saved me. He gave a small smile. You were just cold and lost. Happens to the best of us. No, she said, her voice firmer. I was lost before I ever set foot on that mountain. Then before she could second-guess herself, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. Just once, brief but warm. I hope you light the fire again. Next year, she whispered. I always do, he said, and with that she turned and walked back toward the helicopter. Eli didn't watch the takeoff. He simply stood, hands in his pockets, as the rotor blades kicked up a flurry of snow around the clearing, then silence, then stillness, and then finally a breath. Evelyn sat alone in the cabin of the helicopter, staring out at the trees disappearing beneath them. Her heart felt heavy but also clear in a way it hadn't been in years. Her phone, once surgically attached to her hand, sat untouched in her bag. The world below looked smaller, now simpler, or maybe she had just grown large enough inside to hold it differently. She thought of the fire, of the quiet, of Eli's voice, low and certain, reminding her that surviving didn't mean the pain went away. It meant learning how to carry it. She didn't know where her life would go next. The press would want answers, the board would demand explanations, but none of that mattered quite as much anymore. Because somewhere in the Colorado wilderness, beside a fire built by a man who had lost everything and still offered kindness to a stranger, she had found something worth more than a title. She had found herself. And he, though he didn't know it yet, had lit a fire in her that she couldn't put out. Not now, not ever. The elevator doors opened to a quiet that was too pristine, too curated, like silence manufactured by a branding team. Evelyn stepped into the executive floor of Reed Innovations, her heels clicking across polished marble. The space smelled faintly of lavender and wealth. It should have felt familiar. It didn't. People stopped in their tracks when they saw her. Phones slipped from hands, mouths fell slightly open. Even Diane, her unflappable assistant of 9 years, stared as if seeing a ghost. "Evelyn, my God," Diane rushed forward. Are you all right?" "I'm okay," Evelyn said softly. "You just disappeared. We had the FBI involved. The press went wild. They're still camped outside your Tribeca condo." "I know, I'm sorry." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't mean to cause panic." "Where were you? I needed air." She looked down at her hands. They were manicured again. Diane had arranged a stylist the moment she landed, but they still felt wrong. Too polished for what she carried now. "You were gone for 6 days. You missed the quarterly meeting. The investors are spooked." Evelyn blinked. The mention of investors struck her like a cold splash to the face. How quickly the world moved on. How loudly it resumed its spin. "I'll talk to them," she said. Diane hesitated, then lowered her voice. "You know the board is talking about succession. They're worried about stability, public image." Evelyn nodded. She wasn't surprised, but a piece of her, the piece that had once burned with ambition, no longer cared. She walked past Diane into her office where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of Manhattan. The skyline sparkled like a trophy case. She stared at it without blinking. She'd once loved this room. Now it felt like a museum exhibit about someone she used to be. The sleek desk, the cold chrome fixtures, the walls lined with awards. It was all the same, but she had changed. The door closed quietly behind her. She sank into the chair, removed her heels, and sat barefoot, eyes fixed on the city. The phone on her desk buzzed with incoming calls. Her inbox was flooded. A fresh stack of documents awaited her signature: contracts, partnerships, projections. But Evelyn Reed no longer moved on autopilot. Not after Eli. Not after the firelight and the silence. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. Not her lawyer. Not the head of PR. Not even the board. She called her driver. "Take me home," she said. Later that evening, Evelyn stood in the middle of her penthouse apartment. It was spotless. Lifeless. The thermostat blinked a perfect 72 degrees. Not a pillow out of place. Not a speck of dust on the mahogany shelves. She turned on the TV. Her face filled the screen, grainy footage of her stepping off the rescue helicopter. Headlines scrolled beneath: "Evelyn Reed returns." Where was the missing tech CEO? Disappearing billionaire? Temporary breakdown or strategic move? She turned it off. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. She wandered to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at its contents. Artisanal cheeses pressed, juices, imported olives. None of it made sense anymore. She closed the door and leaned against it. She missed the sound of boots crunching over snow, the pop of firewood splitting in the cold, the smell of coffee brewed over a metal tin. She missed Eli's voice, measured, grounded, so deeply human, it silenced the static in her mind. She went to her bedroom, sat at the edge of the bed, and ran a finger across the silk sheets. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She wept, not because she was overwhelmed, but because for the first time in her life, she could finally feel what she'd been numb to all along, and with that, something shifted. The next morning, Evelyn called an emergency meeting with the board. They filed into the room, pressed suits, sharp glasses, polite expressions masking corporate calculations. She let them speak first. A man in a slate gray suit stood. "We're relieved you're well, but we're deeply concerned about the precedent. This sets investors are anxious. The market needs clarity." She listened. Another board member chimed in. "We're exploring a temporary leadership transition just until things stabilize. Perhaps an acting CEO?" Evelyn leaned forward. "Let me save you the trouble. I'm stepping down." The room fell silent. No media statement, no spin. Just the truth. "I've built something I'm proud of, but I can't keep leading it and pretending I haven't changed." They stared at her stunned. One woman finally asked, "And what will you do now?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'm going to find out who I am when I'm not in charge of everything." They didn't understand. That was okay. She didn't need them to. That afternoon, she stood in Central Park watching a group of children chase pigeons near the fountain. She breathed in the city air, different from the mountains, but still real. A few people passed her and did double takes, whispering. She smiled politely but didn't stop. Her phone rang. Diane Evelyn, the media's reacting. They think this is part of some rebrand. Investors are panicking. I don't care. There was a beat of stunned silence. Evelyn, what's going on with you? I met someone, Diane. Not in the romantic way. Well, maybe not yet, I don't know. But he saved me without asking anything. He listened, without assuming. He didn't know my name, and somehow he saw more of me than anyone ever has. She paused. I think I need to go back to say thank you properly. Diane exhaled to the mountains. Yes, you sure about that? I've never been more sure of anything. That night, Evelyn packed a single duffel bag, jeans, hiking boots, a flannel shirt, a notebook, no laptop, no contracts, and the Swiss Army knife Eli had told her to keep. She stood at her window one last time, looking out at the city that had shaped her, tested her, and almost buried her. Then she turned away, not with bitterness, but with quiet resolve. She wasn't running anymore. She was returning not to a place, but to a man, a fire, and a version of herself she didn't know she'd been missing. The familiar crunch of tires on gravel echoed through the sleepy mountain town of Mountain Pine, a sound that stirred Eli Turner's attention as he worked under the hood of a weather-worn Jeep in front of his garage. It was early afternoon, and the clouds above were beginning to stack like folded wool, threatening rain. The garage was quiet today, just the way he liked it. Eli didn't look up right away. The town saw the occasional tourist, mostly hikers and photographers chasing fall foliage. But this car didn't sound like one of those. It rolled two smooth city tires, luxury suspension. When the engine cut off, a long silence followed. Then the sound of a door opening, a heel clicking softly on gravel. Nice town, came a voice, calm, steady and unmistakably hers. Eli froze. He straightened slowly and looked across the lot. There she stood, not in a suit, not in heels. No entourage, no assistance, no cell phone glued to her ear. Evelyn, no longer just the CEO, but the woman from the woods, the one who had shared his fire and her grief, stood by the side of a sleek black SUV, hands tucked into the pockets of a navy windbreaker. She looked different. The sharp edges were still there, but softened. The tension that had once wrapped her shoulders like armor had loosened. Her blonde hair fell naturally now, windblown and imperfect. Her expression held something unguarded. Eli pulled the rag from his back pocket and wiped his hands slowly, as if buying time to understand what he was seeing. "You came back," he said finally. "I did." He nodded once, then tilted his head. "Thought you had board meetings to run? I quit." His eyebrows lifted. "Not dramatically," she added with a small smile. "No walkouts or scandals, I just let go." Eli crossed his arms. "You sure the world's okay without you holding it together?" "I'm not sure of anything," she said, "but I'm learning to live with that." She walked toward him slowly, every step deliberate, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. "I didn't come to stir up anything. If this is too much, if you don't want me here, I'll go." He studied her face, looking for something. He wasn't sure what. Maybe doubt, maybe guilt. He found neither. Only truth and the quiet ache of someone trying to start over. "Why'd you come?" he asked. "Because you were the only person who saw me when I didn't know who I was. And because I haven't stopped thinking about that fire or what you said or what I felt out there." Eli looked away for a second, jaw tight. "I don't have much to offer, Evie. Just a dusty garage and a house with more creaks than charm." "I'm not here for charm," she said. Silence stretched between them like a held breath. A breeze rustled through the tall pines beyond the lot. She took one more step forward. "Can I buy you lunch?" He cracked a wry smile. "We don't do lunch in Mountain Pine. We have the griddle. They serve eggs and sandwiches. If you're lucky pie," her eyes lit up, "then I'm buying." He stared at her a beat longer, then gave a small nod. "Let me wash up." The griddle sat at the edge of town where Main Street bled into the road toward the valley. A squat little diner with a rusting tin roof and a faded sign. It was known less for its menu than for its people. The moment Evelyn stepped inside, all conversation hushed. It didn't take long for word to spread. By the time they were seated, half the booths were whispering. Eli didn't look fazed. Small towns remember faces. I'm okay with that. They sat across from each other, a chipped coffee mug in front of him, a sweet tea in front of her. The waitress, Judy, with a braid thicker than her wrist, had taken their order. with a look of mild disbelief but didn't ask questions. So Eli said, "What's the plan?" You just visiting Evelyn looked out the window for a moment, gathering her words. "I booked a small cabin just outside town. Not permanent, but not a layover either." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm not here to build a new empire," she said. "I'm here because I need quiet. And I remembered the kind of quiet that actually heals, not just hides." Eli sipped his coffee, watching her closely. "I want to write," she continued. "Nothing corporate, just stories, real ones, people, places. Moments that change lives in small but real ways." He leaned back. "That sounds more like the woman from the fire than the one from the magazines. That's who I'm trying to become." Judy returned with their plates, grilled cheese and tomato soup for her, a BLT and black coffee refill for him. Evelyn smiled politely and dug in, visibly relaxed for the first time since stepping out of the car. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the kind that didn't press or pry. Eventually, Eli broke it. "Most people don't come back. I wasn't finished here. With the town, with you." He looked up. "I don't know what this is." "Eli," she said, "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting. Whatever fairy tales look like for grown-ups. But I know what I felt by that fire, and I know I haven't felt that safe in years." He didn't answer right away. "Then I'm not easy. I'm not fragile. I'm quiet and slow to trust. I'm patient and worth the wait." His mouth curved slightly. "You're still a little bossy." She smiled. "Some things never change." Outside, the clouds shifted and a streak of afternoon sun broke through, casting golden light across the diner window. Eli looked out at the street, then back at her. "You hungry tomorrow?" he asked. "Depends, is there pie involved?" "There might be," he said. "If you're lucky," she grinned. "I think I finally am." And as they finished their meal beneath the stairs, beneath the whispers, Eli Turner realized something quietly miraculous. The woman who had vanished from the world hadn't disappeared. She'd been finding her way home. The mountain air turned brisk as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, tinting the horizon with shades of gold and lavender. A breeze rolled through the pine trees, ruffling the autumn leaves scattered along the front steps of Eli's modest cabin. The house sat on the edge of town, a short drive from the garage, perched on a sloping hill that overlooked a winding creek. It was the kind of home built not for display, but for durability, stone timber and silence. Evelyn stood outside, one hand resting on the wooden railing of the porch, the other clutching a small paper bag. Inside was a bottle of red wine she'd picked up at a little roadside shop. She hadn't known whether he drank, and truth be told, it wasn't about the wine. It was about offering something, a gesture, an acknowledgement that tonight mattered more than she had words for. The front door creaked open before she knocked. Eli leaned against the frame, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He looked freshly showered, though his shirt was still the same. Soft flannel sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His expression was unreadable, but not unkind. "You came," he said. "You invited me." He stepped aside to let her in. The inside of the house was exactly as she imagined. Warm, simple, worn in, like an old pair of boots. Books stacked in corners. A wood-burning stove glowing in the far wall. A quilt draped over the back of the couch. It smelled like cedar and something savory coming from the kitchen. She held up the bag, peace offering, or maybe bribe. He accepted it with a small chuckle. "Hope you're not expecting white linen service. After eating canned soup on a snow-covered rock, I'm not hard to impress." He led her into the kitchen where a modest meal was already waiting. Roast chicken, potatoes, and sautéed green beans. Nothing fancy, everything from scratch. She stared for a moment before sitting. "You cook, I survive. There's a difference." "Well, survival smells amazing." He poured her a glass of wine, filled his own with water, and they sat down across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. The clink of silverware, the crackle of the stove, the hush of twilight settling in the windows. It all wove into something intimate. "Can I ask you something?" she said halfway through her plate. He looked up. "Sure, when we met. Did you ever wonder why I was really out there? I figured you'd tell me if it mattered. What if it mattered a lot?" He considered that. "I guess I figured you were looking for something, or running from something." She nodded. "Both." "You still running?" "No," she smiled faintly. "Now I'm just walking in a different direction." Eli set down his fork. And where does that road lead? I don't know yet, she admitted, but I want to find out somewhere quieter. Truer, less about headlines and more about small things, good things. He studied her, his gaze softening. This town moves slow. That doesn't scare you. I used to be afraid of stillness, she said. I thought if I stopped moving, I'd disappear. But the stillness with you, it never felt empty. It felt honest. The air shifted slightly between them. Eli leaned back in his chair. You talk like a woman who's done a lot of thinking. I had 6 days in the wilderness and a man who cooked over fire and listened without trying to fix me. That'll do it. He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. So this dinner, is it just gratitude? She paused. It started as that, but it's not just that anymore. A beat passed. 2. I came back because I wanted to see if what I felt out there was real. Not the cold or the fear, the calm, the sense that maybe I could build something quieter and stronger than the life I left behind. Eli stood and took her plate, moving to the sink. She watched his back as he rinsed it clean. For a man of few words, his silences were full of meaning. I'm not easy, he said again, almost to himself. You said that already, I mean it. He turned to face her. I've been alone a long time. I don't expect anything. Don't promise anything. I can't give. I'm not asking for promises, she said softly. Just a beginning. The room stilled. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of a clock above the stove. Then Eli walked over, pulled out the chair beside her and sat. You ever fix a car that someone else gave up on? He asked. Yes, she replied, catching the metaphor instantly. It takes patience and care. You don't rush. You listen for the subtle things. You start with what's working before you worry about what's broken. Evelyn looked at him, her voice catching slightly. You think we're something worth fixing? He reached out gently, covered her hand with his. I think we're something worth starting. The moment lingered, quiet, warm, full of the kind of unspoken truth only 2 people who'd known real loss could understand. Outside, the wind stirred the pine trees. Inside, the fire crackled low and steady. They didn't kiss. They didn't have to. Sometimes the soul recognizes home long before the body catches up, and for the first time since their paths had crossed, neither of them felt like they were lost. The following week settled over Mountain Pine like a soft flannel blanket, cool mornings, wood smoke in the air, and trees giving up their leaves in golden handfuls. Evelyn found herself falling into a rhythm she hadn't known she craved. She woke with the sun, walked the forest trails behind her, rented cabin, journaled longhand in the afternoons, and sometimes when the silence grew too still, she'd drive into town just to hear the clink of mugs at the griddle or the buzz of small-town chatter. But it was her time with Eli that felt most grounding. They never declared anything. There was no confession, no sweeping romance, just companionship that felt solid, like the kind of bond built not in urgency but in trust. He helped her change the oil in her car. She brought him coffee during his lunch break. They talked about everything and nothing. It was quiet, it was kind, and it was enough until the past, as it often does, found a way in. It was a Thursday afternoon when Evelyn first noticed the sleek black Mercedes SUV parked on the edge of Main Street. It didn't belong, not in Mountain Pine, not with its tinted windows and out-of-state plates and the air of boardroom arrogance that clung to its polished surface. She was walking out of the hardware store with a new camping lantern when the driver's door opened. Evelyn. She froze, the voice was unmistakable, polished, practiced sharp as a signature pen stroke. She turned slowly. There he was, Grant Teller, Chief Operating Officer of Reed Innovations. Former friend, loyal board member. The man who had once walked her through every IPO negotiation and every investor panic. He looked exactly the same: charcoal suit, leather briefcase, and that ever-calculated calm behind his designer glasses. I had a feeling you might be here, he said. How we tracked the cabin rental, he replied without shame. Diane wouldn't tell us anything, but I've always been better at back doors. She didn't answer, just stood still, letting the weight of his presence settle in her bones. We need to talk, he said. About what? About the company, about you, she exhaled. You should leave. You know, I can't do that. Later that day, Evelyn sat in the corner booth of the griddle with Eli trying to stir her soup, but her hand trembled just slightly. He noticed trouble. She nodded. An old colleague came to town uninvited from the company. Yes, one of the board members, he wants me to come back, says the stocks dropped. Morale's fractured that my stepping down created instability. Eli set down his fork. And what do you want? I want them to stop pulling at me like I'm a loose thread in their machine. I want them to let go. He nodded once slowly, then tell them that they won't listen. They don't believe in soft landings or quiet exits. Everything has to be a pivot or a PR angle. Eli's gaze held hers, then don't give them anything to spin. Evelyn's throat tightened. What if walking away from that life doesn't feel strong? It just feels like failure. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table and gently stilled her stirring spoon. Failure isn't when something ends. It's when you betray who you are, just to keep it going. Her eyes welled before she could stop them. She whispered, I'm tired, Eli. He gave a quiet smile. Then let yourself rest. The next morning, Evelyn found Grant leaning against the railing of her cabin's porch, arms folded. She didn't invite him in. You've built a lot, Evelyn, he said. Are you really going to throw it away for this? He gestured vaguely toward the trees. The quiet, the slowness. I'm not throwing it away, she replied. I'm letting it go. There's a difference. You were a visionary, you changed industries. I lost myself in the process. You think this is who you are now? A woman who hides out in the woods with a mechanic? She took a step forward, voice steady. That man you just dismissed as a mechanic kept me alive when I didn't know if I wanted to be. He listened when I had nothing to offer. He saw me when I didn't even recognize myself. Grant hesitated. We'll offer you a new contract, he said, more flexible. Advisory only, you can split time. Speak at events, come back on your terms. Evelyn looked at the trees swaying gently behind the cabin, at the mountains beyond, at the clear sky that had replaced the storm in her chest. No, she said, is this final? Yes, he stared at her unblinking for several moments. Then he nodded slowly. You know what they'll say. I don't care anymore, she said. Let them talk. I'm done performing. Grant turned and walked away without another word. She watched the SUV disappear down the dirt road, and for the first time since her name had made headlines, she felt no need to chase after it. That night, Evelyn stood on Eli's porch arms, wrapped in a soft wool shawl. He joined her with 2 mugs of coffee, handing her one without a word. They came to drag me back. She said I figured they would, and I said no. He looked at her, a quiet pride in his expression. How'd it feel? Like a door slammed shut behind me. Sometimes that's the only way we know it's real. She leaned against the railing. Do you ever wonder what might have been if your wife hadn't? All the time, he said. But I also know I wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't had to begin again. She nodded. Maybe we're both just people who had to break to start over. He took a slow sip. Maybe starting over is not a weakness. Maybe it's a gift. The stars blinked above them, and the wind moved gently through the trees. No titles, no headlines, no expectations. Just 2 people standing in the quiet, finding strength in having said no to the world and yes to something better. The first snow of the season came early that year, drifting down from the mountains like a memory returning home. It started in the morning, just a flurry of light, almost playful flakes brushing the rooftops of Mountain Pine. By late afternoon, the world was dressed in white softening. Everything it touched, the worn wooden porches, the crooked fences, the fading open signs on shop windows. The town grew quiet as if holding its breath. Evelyn sat by the window of her cabin, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. Outside, the pine trees stood stoic beneath the snowfall, limbs outstretched like guardians of something sacred. Her eyes lingered on the edge of the woods. That's where it had begun, where she had emerged days after the storm, shivering, broken and barefoot, in a life that had grown too large to carry. And somewhere in that wilderness, beside a stranger's campfire, her life had bent in a new direction. Now the snow was falling again, and with it came a memory she hadn't been able to shake. Eli leaning forward to feed the flames, his quiet voice telling her she was enough just as she was. She looked down at the mug untouched, then stood moving with purpose. She pulled on her coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and reached for the thing she hadn't been able to let go of since that night the Swiss Army knife Eli had once told her to keep. It was tucked in the side pocket of her coat. Not a relic, not a souvenir, a promise. Eli was working late at the garage, a habit that stuck when the world got too loud or too quiet. He'd already finished the oil change on a high-mileage Subaru and patched a snow tire for Mrs. Callahan's grandson. Now he stood at the workbench, reorganizing a tray of tools for no particular reason. He didn't expect her. Not tonight, not like this. But he heard the knock on the garage's side door. 3 soft raps and something in his chest paused. When he opened it, she was there. Bundled in wool, cheeks flushed from the cold snowflakes melting in her hair. "Evening," she said, her voice barely above the hush of falling snow. His brow lifted, more surprise than question. "Everything. Okay, I think so, but I need to know for sure." She stepped inside. The warmth of the garage wrapped around her, smelling of oil pine soap and the faintest trace of smoke from the old wood stove he used on cold days. "I've been sitting with something," she said, pulling off her gloves. "A question." He waited. Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. "What would you say if I asked you to make space for me? Real space in your life?" Eli studied her, his hands resting still against the workbench. "You mean?" "Here I mean wherever you are. Wherever this is heading." She took a breath, her voice steady but unguarded. "I've built a life full of power, but never peace. I've known rooms filled with noise, but never warmth. But with you, it's like I can finally hear my own thoughts, and they're not asking for more. They're asking for meaning." He looked down at his hands, rough and stained from years of labor, then back up at her. "You sure about this?" he asked. "This town's slow. This life's quiet. I won't ever be flashy. I won't ever make headlines." Evelyn stepped closer. "Good, I've been all those things, and none of them ever made me feel whole." Eli searched her face for doubt. Found none. "What about the city?" he asked. "I left it. Not just physically in here." She pressed her fingers to her chest. "It took me losing it all to realize I never belonged to it. But you, this place, you saw me before I knew I was lost. That matters more than anything I left behind." Outside, the snow thickened, swirling under the orange glow of the street lamp just beyond the window. Eli took a step forward. "You're not a visitor anymore, are you?" "I'm not," she said. "Not if you'll have me." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a small, time-worn envelope. "I found this last week," he said, tucked inside a book Emily had packed away before the accident. She used to leave little notes. This one just said, "When you're ready to live again, you'll know, and you won't have to do it alone." Evelyn blinked, emotion rising like a tide. He folded the envelope and placed it gently on the bench. "I didn't know what it meant until just now." She stepped toward him again, closing the space between them. Her gloved hand reached for his, lacing their fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't want a fresh start," she whispered. "I want a true one, and I want it with you." He looked into her eyes and saw no sparkle of ambition, no echo of boardrooms or bright lights, just the soft, certain glow of a woman who had fought her way back to herself and come back for him. He let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Then he smiled. "I never put the firewood away," he said. She tilted her head. "What firewood?" "The pile near my campsite. I left it there." "Didn't know why." Her smile widened. "Think we'll need it." He squeezed her hand. "Every winter has its storms. Then we better keep the fire going." They stood there for a while longer, listening to the wind pick up outside. Snow clung to the windows. The whole world felt hushed, reverent, and in that quiet something profound took root. Not just a romance, but the beginning of a life built not from what was lost, but from what was finally found. The months that followed moved at the pace of the town, unhurried, steady, full of moments that might seem small to an outsider, but carried the weight of quiet transformation. Evelyn woke each morning not to conference calls or stock alerts, but to the gentle rustle of pine trees and the aroma of coffee percolating on Eli's old stove. She still rented the same modest cabin, though. More often than not, she fell asleep on Eli's couch, a dog-eared book resting on her chest, his flannel blanket pulled to her chin. She spent her mornings walking the wooded trails with a leather-bound journal in hand, sometimes stopping to sketch, more often to write. The words came slowly at first, halting, unsure, as if her thoughts had grown rusty from years of boardroom filters and press-ready phrasing. But day by day, the sentences softened, deepened, became her own. One crisp morning in late January, she read aloud a passage to Eli as they sipped tea on his porch, bundled in wool and layered socks. Maybe we're all just trying to find the place where silence finally stops being a punishment. Maybe we're looking not for a way out, but a way back in. Eli looked up from his mug. That yours? She nodded, cheeks tinged pink from both the cold and the vulnerability. He smiled, that slow, grounding kind of smile that always made her feel seen. It's good. You think anyone would read something like that? I think people are starving for it. She paused. It's strange, isn't it? I used to build software to predict behavior, optimize attention spans, push people to stay glued to screens. Now I just want to give them a reason to breathe. That's not strange, Eli said. That's healing. At the garage, things remained simple. Eli fixed what was broken: brakes, fan belts, rusted out mufflers. People came to him for more than repairs. They came for honesty, for quiet companionship, for someone who wouldn't upsell them or make them feel like fools. Evelyn started showing up around lunchtime. Sometimes she brought food thermoses of chili cornbread, leftover chicken stew. Other times she brought questions. What's the difference between a timing belt and a serpentine belt? She asked one afternoon, perched on a stool, hands wrapped around a paper cup of cocoa. Eli glanced over his shoulder. Timing belt controls internal engine. Timing synchronizes crankshaft and camshaft. Serpentine belt runs external components, alternator, power steering, air conditioning. She whistled low. So, like the nervous system versus the limbs, he grinned. That's one way to look at it. Can you teach me? You serious? She nodded. You fix engines, I fix words. Seems fair to trade. So he did. Little by little. She learned to identify parts, to use a torque wrench to check fluid levels. She even helped rotate tires, once smudging her jeans and laughing harder than she had in years when Eli handed her a shop rag with mock ceremony. And in return, she read to him. At night, when the garage lights were off and the stove at his place crackled low, she'd curl up with her manuscript in progress and read drafts aloud. He listened, really listened, sometimes asking questions, other times just nodding. This part, he said one evening, tapping the edge of her page where the character hides from the world because she's afraid she's nothing without the noise. That's the part that's going to stick with people. She stared at him. You think so, I know, so. By early spring, Evelyn began volunteering at the local library. What started as helping Mrs. Lindell recatalog the children's section turned into a weekly storytelling hour. Kids gathered on beanbags while she read aloud, from classic tales and later sneak peeks of her own. At first, the townsfolk were cautious, curious. Wasn't that the billionaire woman who vanished for a week and then gave away her company? But slowly the walls came down, because Evelyn didn't act like a billionaire. She acted like a neighbor. She shopped at the general store. She drank coffee at the griddle. She knew people's names and remembered their stories. She learned which kids hated math and which ones loved dogs. She laughed easily and often, and perhaps most telling, she never, not once, mentioned the word CEO. The title that had once defined her now meant so little, it didn't warrant a footnote. One evening, as they were cleaning up after a shared dinner, Evelyn stood by the sink, sleeves rolled up, hands still wet. Eli came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. You're different, he said. She smiled. I know you're lighter. I think I finally set down everything that wasn't mine to carry. He pulled back slightly to look at her. What happens next? She turned, towel in hand, and met his eyes. I don't know, but I don't feel lost anymore, and I don't need to chase anything. She paused, then added softly, unless you want to build something together. Eli didn't answer with words. He kissed her, not with urgency. Not like a scene from the movies, but slow, certain. With the quiet intensity of someone who'd waited a long time to feel whole again. When they parted, the dishes were still dirty, the tea was cooling on the counter, and the rest of the world kept turning. But in that little kitchen, between the man who never spoke more than necessary and the woman who had finally learned to hear herself, something was mended, not just hearts, but lives, thread by thread, step by step. Together. The first anniversary of Evelyn's return came quietly on a crisp October morning, dressed in amber leaves and low golden light. Mountain pine had shifted gently with the seasons. Tourists came and went, snow melted into spring wildflowers, and summer rolled in with quiet festivals and porch-sung country songs. But the rhythm of life between Evelyn and Eli had become its own kind of steady music, one that played softly through their days in laughter, shared silence, and the simple grace of belonging. That morning, Evelyn stood at the edge of the woods near the same trail where it all began. A trail that had once led her into confusion, fear, and then against every odd home. She wore a faded blue scarf one Eli had given her the first winter after her return, and her fingers curled around the familiar smooth edges of the old Swiss Army knife now clipped to her belt. Eli came up beside her, slipping his hand into hers. No words passed between them. They didn't need them. The two hiked together in silence. Boots crunching over leaves, the air brisk with the scent of pine and earth. When they reached the clearing, Eli set down his small canvas pack and crouched to gather dry twigs just as he had done 1 year ago. Evelyn knelt beside him, hands practiced now, movements sure. They worked in tandem, wordless but in perfect rhythm until the first spark caught. Then the next flames grew slowly, curling upward into a gentle flickering blaze. They sat shoulder to shoulder as the fire took hold, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in memory. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out 2 battered journals. One she handed to Eli. "I thought it was time," she said. He flipped it open, brows furrowing. "These are your stories." "They're our stories," she corrected softly. "Not all true to the letter, but true in spirit. The mountains, the fire, the quiet, the way people carry grief and find their way back to living again." Eli traced a finger over a line of her looping handwriting. "You're publishing this?" "I already did." Quietly. No press tours, no CEO name on the cover, just initials. "It's on the shelf at the library." He smiled deeply, moved. "You came back to that moment and built something out of it." "I had to," she said. "I needed people to know that getting lost doesn't mean you're broken. Sometimes it's just a different kind of beginning." Eli leaned back, letting the firelight warm his face. "Funny how a little flame in the woods can change 2 people's lives." She turned to look at him. "That fire didn't just warm me. It gave me back my soul." They felt quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt not like absence, but fullness. Then, almost as an afterthought, Evelyn said, "I talked to the town council last week." Eli raised an eyebrow. "I'm helping turn the old ranger station into a retreat center," she continued, "just small. A place for people who need to step away from the noise. A few cabins, trails, maybe a little writing room." He chuckled, so much for slowing down. "No," she said with a smile. "This time it's not about speed, it's about intention." He looked at her, his voice low. "You're staying?" It wasn't a question. Evelyn reached across and took his hand. "I already stayed, Eli. I'm just building roots now." They sat there long into the afternoon, the fire flickering between them, throwing warm shadows on their faces as the sun dipped toward the ridgeline. Eventually, Evelyn stood brushing off her jeans. "I brought something else." She reached into her pack and pulled out a small wooden box. She knelt beside the fire, opened it, and revealed a handful of small hand-carved stones, each one etched with a word: "Hope, home, quiet." "Begin," I thought, she said softly, "that maybe this could be our tradition. Every year we come back, we add a stone. We remember what we've built, what we survived." Eli took one in his hand, the one that said "begin." He turned it over gently. "It's a good word," he said. "It's our word," she replied. They placed the stones in a small circle near the fire pit, not too perfect, just enough to be meaningful. And then as the last light of day faded, Evelyn stood beside Eli, wrapped her arm through his and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love was something loud," she whispered. "Big gestures, flashy moments. But this is the kind of love that endures." Eli didn't reply right away. Then in his quiet way he said, "This is the kind that doesn't burn out." The fire crackled behind them, steady and warm. And there in the place where 2 strangers once met under snow, in silence a new tradition was born. Not of trauma or loss, but of life reborn in the quiet. Of love that grew not in thunderclaps, but in the gentle rhythm of 2 souls, choosing each other every day, every season, every snow. As dusk settled into night, the flames glowed low, casting a golden circle into the forest. And long after the embers cooled, the warmth remained, because some fires lit by kindness, tended by trust, and guarded by love never go out. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss another tale of love, hope, and the quiet beauty of second chances. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your support means the world. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop believing in the power of a simple act of goodness.